So, okay, Daniel chapter 11, we left off in verse 16. So what we're going to be covering is Daniel 11, 17 through 45, ending the chapter, and then we're going to be also covering Daniel chapter 12. So when we left off in Daniel 11, Daniel was seeing a vision at the Tigris River in the midst of many angels, and also the possibility of being in the midst of the pre-incarnate Christ, giving a vision of not just the future or the ending of the 70 years for the nation of Israel to be able to enter back to their homeland, back to the promised land, but the future, centuries future, of specifically the Grecian Empire into the Roman Empire, and then for us into the future with the Antichrist. So where we left off now is that, remember, we had a battle between what two generals or what two kingdoms under the Grecian Empire fighting each other over land. You guys remember? That's right, the Ptolemaics and the Seleucids. So we're going to just relate these one more time. 4 kingdoms. We have Cassander. We have Lysimachus. That's wrong. No H there. Lysimachus. The Ptolemaics. And we have, oh man, I almost forgot, Seleucids. So just beginning in Daniel 11, let's read from 1 to 16 just so we can get a review. And as for me, in the first house of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. Now this is the angel speaking to Daniel. This is not Daniel speaking. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. Speaking of these 4 kingdoms here. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise. Oh, excuse me, that's not correct. We have Alexander the Great. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven. Those are the 4 kingdoms. But not to his posterity, nor according to the authority from which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. Then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. After some years they shall make an alliance. Those 2 making an alliance are, of course, the Ptolemaics and the Seleucids. And the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. Do you guys remember who we're speaking of there? What does it say in your notes? Who is the woman that's being spoken of?
Oh, Bernice.
Bernice, correct, yeah. And from a branch from her roots one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. And for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall be cast down 10s of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude, greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. And in those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city. And the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. So what we're talking about is just back and forth of the Ptolemaics and the Seleucids vying for power within the Middle East. Ultimately speaking of the glorious land, Israel. And so we have, leaving off, let me double check here. There, yep. So what we have specifically is looking at the Seleucid kingdom. We're at the point now where we are looking at Antiochus III, right? Antiochus III being the father of Antiochus Epiphanes. All right, remember Antiochus Epiphanes is the fourth, okay? So Antiochus III finally, against the Ptolemaics, finally gaining control of that major trade route through Israel and the surrounding land as well. So many Jews, because of that, actually joined with Antiochus III to fight against the Ptolemaics so they would be free from their rule. The Ptolemaics were, at the time, tyrannical against the Jews, against Israel. And it was almost to the effect that the statement that the Jews were making were as if to say, you know what, anything's better than being under the tyrannical rule of the Ptolemaics. Let's fight for the Seleucids so the Seleucids can gain control over the surrounding region. And so what we have now is the beginning, we're continuing on in this conquest, in this battling of the Seleucids and the Ptolemaics, beginning with verse 17 and 20, where we find another woman entering onto the stage, entering into the narrative, who is one that we also know in history. So Daniel 11, verse 17 to 20. Eliza, why don't you start with that and we'll go around. 17 to 20, please, yeah.
He shall set his face to him with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring the terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give them the daughter of woman to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Afterward, he shall turn his face to the coastland and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him.
Mm-hmm.
He shall turn his face back toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead to verse 20.
Then shall arise in his place one who shall send them exactly of his youth for the glory of his God, but within a few days he shall be broken neither in anger nor in wrath.
Okay, so we have this trading off, this back and forth of the Ptolemaics and the Seleucids fighting over the Middle East, fighting over Egypt. And here we have Antiochus III, the king of the Seleucids, again trying to reach a peace treaty with the Ptolemaics to finally end this battle. So once again, what have we discussed before? What is one of the ways that we build a peace treaty between two warring factions? We have a wedding. Yeah, we have a wedding to bring peace between them. Now, Antiochus III had a daughter who was Egyptian, and she was historical. We know her as Cleopatra. So, okay. This is the woman being spoken of in verse 17 to 20. Antiochus III gives his daughter Cleopatra to Ptolemy V. So, she's on Team Seleucid. She marries Ptolemy V. All right? Of course, he is part of the Ptolemaics. As a peace treaty, but also Antiochus III is hoping to gain permanent influence in Egypt through political means. However, this was a failure because what we discover very much often in the story of Cleopatra, she was not faithful to Ptolemy V, right? She was not faithful or never faithful to Ptolemy V. And thus, looking at verse 18, it gives us a clue to this. After this, he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. Okay? So from verse 18, from here, Antiochus III tries to take over Greece and Asia Minor. Okay? So verse 18 speaks of Antiochus III. If I do A with the Roman numeral 3, will you guys get that? Okay. Antiochus III goes against Greece, giving us the evidence of going towards those coastlands, all right? He goes towards Greece and Turkey, or Asia Minor, at this time, but is defeated by a Roman general named Lucius Cornelius Scipio, who really, really beat him quite bad. So I'm going to put this here. Was defeated by a Roman. Okay? Now we're starting to see the bubblings up of the Roman Empire. Okay? We're starting to see those legs of iron starting to show. Was defeated by a Roman. I want to spell his name right. Roman general. His name was, how would you like to have a name like this? Lucius Cornelius Scipio. Okay? So Antiochus III was defeated in desiring to conquest against Greece and Turkey, defeated by Roman general Lucius Cornelius Scipio. Okay? So now verse 20 is very key for us, at least in the visions, or the previous visions that we've understood in the past, where it says, verse 20, there shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. Okay? This is talking about Antiochus III's son, Seleucus III, who only reigns for a small period of time. Because remember what happens to Seleucus III. Does everybody have this?
Yes.
You guys have it? Yep. Okay. What happens to Seleucus III? Remember he had a really small reign because of what? It goes like this. Antiochus III has a son, Seleucus III.
Oh, didn't they Antiochus and him fight and he lost to his killed?
Yeah, he was killed by his brother, Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay? So, Antiochus IV, which is our Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay? So he rules for a small time, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. Okay? So that's where we get that kind of foul play aspect of what happened with Antiochus IV that we discussed in Daniel chapter 8 when we looked at the ram and the goat. Remember? Remember that? You guys have it in your notes, okay? So let's keep plugging away. Let's look at verse 21 to 31. Charisse, can you read that for me?
And in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of royalty. But he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by entreaty. With the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. You shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil,
Mhm.
and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacy shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table. But it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. While returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. At the appointed time he shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved in return, and rage against the holy covenant, and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant.
Go ahead and read verse 31. Sorry. Yep.
And forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation.
Okay, great. So we're looking at the specifics now of Antiochus Epiphanes' reign. So you can even put that as your side note. And the whole reign of Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, was that section. So it is Daniel 11, verse, I want to get that right, 21 to 31. Okay? So we see him being a very vile person. We see verse 21, shall arise a vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably, seize the kingdom by intrigue. Remember, because it was intended for his brother, and then his brother's son, right? It wasn't for that. And what did Antiochus IV do with his brother's son? Kidnapped him, took him to Rome, and basically extorted him for the kingdom, right? And so he does that by intrigue. And with the force of a flood, they shall be swept away from him, before him, and be broken. Also the prince of the covenant. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully. So he's making this alliance. He's making these peace treaties for a time for him, though, to ultimately usher in control. Again, this speaks about that false peace, kind of giving that foretaste again of the Antichrist, where the first half of the tribulation is a false peace that is ushered in by the Antichrist, and then we have the last 3.5 years being absolute and utter destruction. Verse 24, he shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places of the province. He shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. And this is what he shall do. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. So we have him building up his kingdom, but then here at verse 25 and 26, we see him not being able to control it. He shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. So he's hoping to make treaties with Egypt, but secretly he's building and amassing a large army against Egypt, and he has a few military campaigns against Egypt. And specifically, his second campaign, or his second hopes of war against Egypt, again, wanting to have control against Egypt, he will be defeated for a specific reason, okay? He comes against Egypt and he is defeated because of this next bubbling empire. What is the next bubbling empire? Rome, that's right. He's defeated because Egypt alliances itself with Rome, okay? Because Egypt allies itself with Rome, okay? And Rome ultimately defeats the armies of Antiochus Epiphanes, all right? Even to the point that Antiochus Epiphanes is captured by the Roman army and demanded to pay tribute to Rome and therefore was forced to surrender. What also is happening here in the midst that is not really told to us, at least in that section, is what's going on in Israel, right? He is starting to take away their faith. He's starting to take away from their daily sacrifices. And we get those kinds of foretastes in what's shared to us where he speaks about moving against the Holy Covenant. You see that's repeated often in verse 21 to 31. For instance, in verse 28, while returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the Holy Covenant. That's speaking of specifically the faith of the Jewish people. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. Then at an appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. That is because of their alliance with Rome. Okay, verse 29 is speaking of Egypt's alliance with Rome. For ships from Cyprus, okay, we know that those ships from Cyprus were actually Roman ships because Rome, the Roman Empire, had control of Cyprus at that time. So for ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the Holy Covenant again and do damage, right? So it's kind of like, in a sense, he is using Israel kind of as an abusive child, right? He keeps going back and forth, trying to gain conquest, trying to take and assert control over the world, and he keeps getting pushed back by these legs of iron, the Roman Empire. So he returns back to Israel and goes against the Holy Covenant in rage against them. And so we see that there in verse 30. He shall return and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. Forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. We know, of course, what that is. Can anybody tell me? The abomination of desolation.
Is that when he just slaughters a pig on the altar?
That's right. Yeah, he slaughters a pig. A pig on the altar. Yeah. Yeah, good. So, because of his surrender and defeat, he turns his anger towards the Jews and comes back with a rage that was mighty, ultimately destroying, hopefully destroying their faith system. But then, of course, we have that story of the Maccabean revolt, okay? We have the Maccabean revolt, which is instituted by Judas Maccabeus. Maccabean revolt because of Judas Maccabeus. And they overthrow not Antiochus Epiphanes himself, but they overthrow his power, his influence, his strongholds in Israel so that they are able to take back their own land. Okay? So Judas Maccabeus conquers Antiochus Epiphanes' influence and army, and then institutes his own kingdom, the Hasmonean dynasty, okay, which was very, very short. Hasmonean dynasty, which was ultimately, it became a point of being like, you couldn't live in Israel, you couldn't live in Jerusalem unless you were a practicing Jew. They were kicking out anyone that was not faithful to Judaism. It was a very short-lived dynasty because what happens? Again, it's another major trade route. The Roman Empire shows up and takes over, and then we have, of course, ultimately all the way to the point where we have the time of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus. Okay? So they're overthrown by the Roman Empire. Okay, so So verse 32 through 35 covers now a lot more time than just what was mentioned from the beginning of chapter 11 up to this point through verse 31. Alyssa, do you want to read verse 32 to 35, please?
With flattery he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, but the people who knew their God will firmly resist him. Those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword and be burned or captured or plundered. When they fall, they will receive a little help, and many who are not sincere will join them. Some of the wise will stumble so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will still come at the appointed time.
Okay. So verse 32 through 34 is basically what we were talking about right here with the Maccabean revolt. Okay? 32 to 34. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. Verse 33, and those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Verse 34, and now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. Then verse 35 is a big key word to eschatology, to future events, to prophecy. Okay, look at verse 35 with me. And some of the wise shall stumble so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits. It still awaits the appointed time. All right? Now, this is what we share what we were talking about with the 70 weeks. Remember at the beginning of chapter 11, looking at does everybody have this?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions about before we jump into verse 35, because it's such a key point? Anything up to this point? Guys good? Okay. Getting your history down? Okay. All right. Verse 35 is a key one. Just make sure I have all my ducks in a row real quick. Mm-hmm. 40 to 45. That's correct. Okay. Verse 35 is what we could say is the great parenthesis. Remember what the great parenthesis is? Can somebody tell me what the great parenthesis is?
The time between the 69 and the 70.
That's right. Yeah. It is the time that we are living in right now, okay? It's the time between that kind of precursor to the Antichrist, Antiochus Epiphanes, and the actual Antichrist that is now future, okay? So what we see now is still somewhat giving a picture to Antiochus Epiphanes, but now more so giving us clues and giving us direction on how to foresee and expect who this Antichrist is going to be like, and what we can kind of see and be cautioned by what will soon happen in the future. So verse 35, I'll say from my text, some of the wise shall stumble so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. That is talking about this time that we're living in now. This is the present era. Because remember, this is not specifically talking about all of us as Christians. It's not specifically talking about the church. Again, the focus is on Daniel and the nation of Israel, right? So when we're going to be looking at the Antichrist, it's going to be, again, in that environment, in that picture of Israel. So this is the present era that we're living in. And again, it gives us clue, again, how the nation of Israel is fighting and seeking or desiring to really to survive against surrounding nations, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, all of these nations that are really seeking, you know what, we would want your land, we want your country. This tiny little speck of a country amongst the whole world is seeking to just continue to survive as a nation. And you kind of get that idea of verse 33, those are the people who understand shall instruct many, yet for many days they shall fall by sword, by flame, by captivity, by plundering. And when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help. We see nations like us, we help Israel remain, but many shall join with them by intrigue, and some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. Now, here we come to the future, verse 36. Now we see the Antichrist. So, verse 36 to 39 is speaking of, even into the end of the chapter, speaking about the Antichrist. So, Chris, why don't you read verse 36 to 39?
The king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed. For what has been determined must take place. He will show no regard for the gods of his ancestors, or for the one desired by women. Nor will he regard any god, but will exalt himself above them all. Instead of them, he will honor a god of fortress, a god unknown to his ancestors. He will honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He will make them rulers over many people, and will distribute the land at a price.
Okay, so it's giving us at least some detail of who this Antichrist will be. Verse 37 has the speculation or the connotation, at least on my parts, and some other scholars' part. I think Walvoord associates this as a possibility as well. Verse 37, he shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the ones beloved, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. It's possible that the Antichrist will be Jewish, as it's shared here. He will not follow the gods of his fathers, having that focus on Israel. And also it's a possibility that he might be a homosexual. Speaking of course, that he has no desire for women. What was your translation say there in verse 37?
He will show no regard for the gods of ancestors, for the one desired by women. Okay,
for the one desired by women. New King James says, he shall not regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. My text also is those desired by women. So it's a possibility, but again, it comes back to we are speculating at this point. So also, though, Haggai chapter 2, verse 7 tells us that the desire of women can also refer to the description of being the desire of all nations. What is meaning here is he's going to be a very influential leader by not just women, but also men as well. They're going to see him as being someone who is really quite attractive, not just physically, but probably attractive due to the amount of power that he has and the amount of influence to bring peace. And what I really think is going to be one of the defining moments of the Antichrist, I truly think that he's going to bring peace in the Middle East between Palestinians and the Jewish people. And by doing so, he's going to do that which no one else has ever done before. And there's a possibility behind that, and I think it's going to relate back to the Temple Mount, because we know what the Temple Mount has, the Dome of the Rock, right? Which is that monument to Muhammad in that bedrock there on the Temple Mount. And many think as long as that is there, there's no possible way for a temple, a Jewish temple, to be built in relation to the amount of land that's on that hill, Mount Moriah. Well, there's possibility for the Jewish temple to simply be moved a little bit to the left and have both temples there. Of course, no one would ever want that, either Jewish or Muslim, would ever agree to that happening. If that was possible for a leader to actually pull that treaty together, then that would definitely make him one of the most influential leaders in the entire world. So,
Where in Haggai was that?
Haggai chapter 2, verse 7. Haggai chapter 2, verse 7. Okay? So it's speaking of someone different now than Antiochus Epiphanes. It's speaking of a future king. Notice there in verse 36 to 39, no one is mentioned as another king there at all, except this specific one, the Antichrist. All right? There's only one king mentioned. The king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, ultimately every king. And they shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. That wrath, of course, being the wrath of God, for he has determined it shall be done, there in verse 36. Okay? Any questions on that section? All right, let's do this again. Finish with chapter 11. I know we are moving at a cheetah pace, but we need to finish it to get into chapter 12. Verse 40 to 45, I will read it. Verse 40, at the time of the end, okay, that should alert ourselves to say, okay, this is a future event. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen and with many ships. And he shall come into countries and shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand, Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver, and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and with none to help him. So that key phrase there, at the time of the end, what this angel is describing to Daniel is saying now there will be a confederation of kings, not just the south, not just the north. All of those things have been traded into different nations and different empires at this point. But there'll be a confederations of kings coming against this great leader with a battle ultimately near the Holy Land. And prophetically speaking, a precise identification of peoples mentioned here is difficult. Remember, we've seen this has changed hands. The king of the south might have been the king of the north centuries before, and it's just these battlings back and forth. But the king of the south may be Egypt or represent the Arab community. The king of the north may be the Antichrist domain as the new Antiochus Epiphanes, or it may be Russia. The precise points may be cloudy, but the general idea is clear. The end will be marked by great conflict, culminating in the world's armies gathering at the promised land to do a final battle. But specifically, again, looking at verse 45, yet, the very last words of verse 45, yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. All right? He shall come to his end with none to help him, meaning that the Antichrist himself will face utter destruction because he is going against not just the nations, he's actually going against God himself. And this is what we discover there in the book of Revelation, the final battle of Armageddon, right? All right? The plains of Megiddo, or the plains of Armageddon, where all the nations of the world will gather not to fight necessarily against themselves, although they are always in turmoil against each other. They are gathered to fight against God himself. And that is when Jesus will come in his second coming, as Zechariah 14 tells us. He will touch his foot on the Mount of Olives, and then he will go and utterly destroy all evil for all eternity, ushering in his own kingdom. Okay? So some of those points are cloudy because what we're looking at now is a future event. None of these things that were understood from verse 35 to 45 have happened yet in the historical way that the rest of it has happened before. So this is what we're looking forward to, or not necessarily looking forward to, but being aware of and sensitive about what's going to take place in the coming future. So Any questions about that? I know it's a lot of history there in chapter 11, but it's all pointing to the fact that this angel is not just giving a guess or giving a hypothesis. He's actually saying this is how the Lord in his sovereign hand is orchestrating the nations of the earth to ultimately fulfill his planning. So then we get to chapter 12, which concludes this vision of the anointed one that began in chapter 10, a vision of what will happen with the nation of Israel, and ultimately now the end of the book of Daniel, which is such a wonderful, wonderful conclusion. A very, very short chapter. Chapter 12 is only 13 verses. So why don't we take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back right around 2:55, 3 o'clock. Okay? Daniel chapter 12. So, again,
We can
what?
ask him afterwards. Well, we have a question for you afterwards.
Oh, go ahead. No, that's fine.
Okay. The genealogy
Mm-hmm.
of Seleucus,
Uh-huh.
like 'cause
Third.
some of our notes aren't adding up.
Okay.
So in the battle of, let's skip that. So in Daniel 11:9-13, when it says sons prepare for war,
Uh-huh.
you said it was both the sons of Seleucus.
Mhm.
Seleucus the second.
Both the sons of Seleucus. No, it would be Seleucus because he had Antiochus III and Seleucus. Correct?
Okay.
Seleucus the second had Seleucus the third and Antiochus the third.
Right.
Okay. So
And then over here it says Seleucus the third,
Uh-huh.
which is Antiochus the third's son.
Okay. No, that must be incorrect then.
Okay.
It must be it must be another Seleucus. Yeah, not Seleucus the third.
So it's not the same person.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
Seleucus the third is whose son?
Seleucus the third. Okay, let me get this right. Okay. We have Seleucus the third and Antiochus the third were brothers under Seleucus. Is that correct? Seleucus the second.
Yeah.
Right. There it is. Okay.
Okay, so okay, that makes sense. So this is
I know, it's because all of them have the same names, and then like
it's just a matter of one more tally.
yes, yeah, right, right.
So then who? So then who is Antiochus the second?
Antiochus the second. Okay, let me see your notes because I don't have my notes from the previous.
Sorry.
Let's see if
These neat ones.
Okay. Daniel 5:8. North Seleucids occupied Israel 305 to 203. South Ptolemies occupied. North and south become allies. Yes. Married to others customary. Antiochus the second and Bernice marry. Okay. Under Seleucus, yes. Ptolemy. Yep. Antiochus the first, Antiochus the second, Antiochus the third, then the fourth. That's correct.
Okay.
Under Seleucus.
Mhm.
So then Seleucus the second, that must be Seleucus the second, correct?
That is.
That must be Seleucus the second
Okay.
because he had Antiochus the third and Seleucus the third.
Right.
Is that correct? Does that sound correct?
So
Kind of, but if it's
second is both of those.
okay, so this would be instead of Seleucus, it's Seleucus the third.
So then are you asking
No, Seleucus the second.
Right.
Because then he gave birth to Antiochus the first.
No. He must have given birth to, it must be Seleucus the second
Okay.
Seleucus the second had Antiochus the third. Okay, there's something
Yeah.
misunderstood here.
And that's just what we went over today.
Yeah. This is what you've had previously.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, but you're not
This was my original. These were my original.
Right.
yeah.
That was horrible. Okay.
So Antiochus the
So
fourth,
Seleucus, and then
Uh-huh.
at that time we
the
didn't.
son of Antiochus the third.
Right. Yeah.
Because at that time we didn't know his name.
Right.
That's not.
Right.
I Wikipedia'd it.
Okay, who
So
was
I
it?
Typed it in. His son was Antiochus the first.
Okay. Seleucus the first, Antiochus the first. But that cannot fit the timeline
Yeah.
of the generations of going down that way.
Yeah.
So it has to be that this must be Seleucus the second,
Okay.
to have Antiochus the third. Okay, write that down in a parentheses, and then what I will do is I'll gather my notes, and I will email you guys the proper timeline, or the proper what do you say, heritage or family tree? Yeah, right, exactly.
Okay.
Just so it's ultimately clear, because I know it's a lot of information with a lot of the same names. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, last 13 verses of Daniel chapter 12. Verse 1, at that time, let me turn to Daniel chapter 12. We're just going to go verse by verse since it's small. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. So we remember Michael is whom? The great archangel, right? And he is in the spiritual realm, the one who is overseeing, at least for your people, verse 1, the nation of Israel, okay? So what does it mean where he says at that time? At that time is speaking of the time of the end, yet to come in our day, ultimately the end of days, the end of the book, as it were, for Revelation, into the tribulation and then the coming kingdom of our Jesus Christ. So let's talk about Michael just for 1 second. Do you guys know what the definition or the name meaning of Michael is?
The Lord is something.
The Lord is something?
The Lord is.
It's a big question. It's
like
who.
the Lord? No.
Yeah, that's
Who is
right.
like the Lord?
Who is like the Lord, right? Who is like God? He's the great archangel that helps Gabriel overcome the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece in Daniel chapter 10. And then we know from Jude, if you read the book of Jude, in Jude 9, there's no chapters, there's just one chapter, so it's verse 9 of Jude. He actually disputes over the body of Moses against the devil himself and wins. So Jude verse 9 is Michael winning against the devil for the body of Moses. And this is what we can kind of get twisted, at least in our kind of broad idea of who God is and the broad idea of good versus evil. It's very natural for us to kind of go with what the world thinks and thinking that the devil and God are equal, right? That, it's always this battle against good and evil, so it's always against God and the devil. No, it's not. It's not equal by any means. God is over and above more powerful than the devil. But we remember that the devil was once an archangel, right? Lucifer. So Michael winning against the devil is somewhat of a fair fight in the means of an archangel versus an archangel. But ultimately the Lord, God himself, is going to destroy the devil. And Michael, as he gets the responsibility of throwing the devil out of the heavenly realm in the future. Revelation chapter 12, if you want to turn there real quickly. Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 to 9, tells us this, and a war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon. Who's the dragon? Satan. And the dragon and his angels fought, verse 8, but they did not prevail, nor is a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Who gets to do that? Michael. Michael does that. Okay.
So he casted him out when he first rebelled.
No, this is after. A war breaks out in heaven in Revelation chapter 12. They fight against the devil. He was cast out, who deceives the whole world, and he was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And so that gives us a reference point in time, verse 1, at that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, there shall be a time of trouble. Okay? A time of trouble. This is the name of the tribulation period in Scripture. Okay, this is the tribulation. It's called many different things. In Isaiah, it's called the Day of Vengeance. All right. Jeremiah 30. Jeremiah, it is called a time of trouble for Jacob, okay? Or Jacob's trouble. Daniel, it speaks of specifically the 70th week, right? And Zephaniah tells us it's the great day of the Lord, okay? All right. But this word tribulation we get from the Gospel of Matthew in Matthew 24, verses 21 to 22. And that tells us, for then there will be a great tribulation, such has not been seen since the beginning of the world until this time, nor ever will it be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. All right. Also, speaking of Revelation chapter 12, later on in verse 13 and 18, now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, and a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. That's speaking of Satan coming against this woman, talking about your people there in verse 1 is Daniel's people, it is Israel. Rescued, meaning that the Lord will ultimately rescue the nation of Israel. Some believe taking that 144,000. You guys know that from Revelation, the 144,000 that will be saved from Israel to be a remnant, a faithful remnant, in order that they can be written in the Lamb's book of life. So all of that is speaking just right there in verse 1, such as never was seen there was a nation even to that time, and at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. So that not only means just the nation of Israel, those that are faithful to God with a faithful remnant in the nation of Israel, it's speaking of you and me. We are those that are grafted into that vine. Our names are written into the book of life, so we shall be saved as well. Okay? Any questions before we get into verse 2?
Is there any speculation on why they were fighting over Moses' body?
Yeah,
Just
some people think that it was actually like another rabbinical supplementary source of traditional story of Michael, because we know that they couldn't find the bones of Moses' body, because some think that just like Elijah, he was swept up. Read the book of Jude. It'll be interesting for you. Have you ever studied it before? Oh, okay.
I've read it. But
Right. Yeah. I don't know the real history behind it. But if Jude says it's true, then I believe that it's Michael winning against the devil for the body of Moses. So, I know that there's some other speculation behind it. I just don't quite remember at this point. So. Verse 2, many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. All right? This is speaking of the resurrection. This is speaking of us being resurrected from death into life as believers. Now, I want you guys understand that there are two resurrections, right? There are those who are resurrected into life, and there's also those that are resurrected into death. This is what Scripture tells us. All of us, we were from all humanity has been created in the image of God, and will all face a resurrection. It's just dependent upon the destination that we go to. This is what's discovered here. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Okay? Resurrection of all unbelievers at the end of the millennium. So, Romans, you guys know from Romans chapter 8, speaks about this. Romans chapter 8, verse 31 to 39. First, I'll erase this. Verse 2. Raised to everlasting life, or raised to, what does my translation say here? Shame and contempt. All right. Romans chapter 8, verse 31 to 39 gives us insight on this. Romans 8, 31 to 39. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Who shall bring a charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. Who is he who condemns or brings into shame and contempt? It is Christ who died and furthermore is also risen, who is even at the right hand of God, who also makes intercession for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? Skipping down for verse 37, yet in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, angels, principalities, powers, present things or things to come, height nor depth nor any of those created things shall be able to separate us from the love of God. And then the angel continues on and says, those who are wise, look at verse 3, those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. I mean, this goes just to some easy application for us to share the gospel, to share the love of Jesus. A great promise to those that win souls for Christ. Who are the wise of this world? Those that follow Christ Jesus with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. Okay? It's that last application as it's coming down to the end of the book, just some good motivation for us to really share the gospel, to know because of the days are coming very short. And soon enough, either we will see or our children will see the ultimate rising up of this Antichrist, and we have to be sensitive to that. But he gives a caution to Daniel in verse 4. But you, Daniel, shut up these words. You, Daniel, shut up these words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. And then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, one on this river bank and the other on that river bank. And one said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? Okay? It's strange. Jack Van Imp says, isn't it strange that expositions of this book, Daniel, were not attempted until recent times? No expositor made and published attempt to explain Daniel verse by verse until the 20th century. Isn't that interesting? There's no commentaries. There's no expositional exposition of this scripture until the 20th century, because it's not an easy book for us to truly grasp. But here he is. It's the caution. Daniel, shut up these words, seal the book until the time of the end. Money shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. What that means is that there's going to be some time for these things to start unfolding. Remember, all of this that has been spoken of, really from Daniel chapter 10 on, is speaking of this future time for Daniel. Things that he's not going to experience in his own lifetime, but see centuries ahead. And he says there's going to be a moment where knowledge will increase. Well, that's the case for us today. Our knowledge has increased because we know that what these things that were foretold have actually come to place. So we can take those things and say, okay, we're looking at history. That gives us the motivation to say, yeah, we can also trust what Daniel says about the future. So he looks, and he's standing there with two others, one on this riverbank. We remember which riverbank is that? The Tigris, correct? This riverbank, and the other on that riverbank. And the one said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? So there he is, Daniel. He's still at the bank of the Tigris receiving his last vision from the angel when he looks up and he sees two angels, one on each side of the river. So it's just kind of granting us a picture here. Mind my angels. Right? Two angels on either side of this river. Then he blinks and looks again, because hovering over this river is another man clothed in linen. Okay? All right? So another man clothed in linen, and many believe, again, not just speculation, but looking back towards that vision of chapter 10, this is in fact the pre-incarnate Christ. This is Jesus, because he is different. He is described as being different than the others. So the angels begin to ask questions that Daniel probably wanted to ask, and the one man said to the man clothed in linen. So it's not Daniel speaking to this man clothed in linen, it's the angel asking a question to this man in linen. It's this angel asking a question to the pre-incarnate Christ. Verse 6, how long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? Okay? He's the one that knows, right? The angels don't necessarily know, but they know what the Lord tells them. This man in linen, Jesus, knows. So verse 7, then I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand towards heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things will be finished. So we remember again from looking at our text, time, times, and half a time, ultimately was 42 months or 1,260 days. Remember, we did that math before. Revelation chapter 11, verse 1 to 3. Revelation 11, 1 to 3 speaks of these 42 months in the future. Speaking of John, then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood and said, rise, measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there, but leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. And I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. All right? And like many of us, although our knowledge has increased, we're not fully understanding of what's going to happen until we experience it. And neither is Daniel. Verse 8 tells us this. Although I heard, I did not understand. Right? Verse 8. Although I heard, I did not understand. Then I said, O my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? Notice Daniel is not asking these angels, he's asking the Lord who is over the waters, this man in linen. Basically he's saying, you know what? I've spent my life receiving these visions, right? I've spent my life interpreting these dreams before foreign emperors, and it comes all now to this culmination of what you're going to declare to me is going to happen in the future, and Lord, I just don't get it. I don't know fully what this outcome is going to be. Daniel was encouraged by the Lord. This is what the Lord tells him in verse 9, and he says, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. It's sealed for our understanding to the time of the end. It's basically, and I want this to provide us comfort, not necessarily a conclusion of just being like, well, I just don't get it at all. It should provide comfort to us. Verse 9, Daniel was encouraged not to concern himself with these details at this point of human history. Again, we are called to study the Word of God. We're called to interpret it from the culture and the context that we know through history. But ultimately, we have to trust this man in linen who knows all of these things is going to orchestrate them by his sovereign hand. And that is comfort there, verse 9 of chapter 12. Go your way, Daniel, meaning keep leading this life that I have called you to lead, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. And still he explains, verse 10, many shall purify themselves, make themselves white and be refined. But the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise will understand. I really think that verse 10 is speaking about those that become saved under the work of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Verse 10, many shall be purified and made white and refined. No person, and Daniel knows this, through the festivals and the feasts, through the works of daily sacrifices before the Lord, he knows for a fact that no one person can be completely purified and made white. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where the priest comes to make atonement for the nation of Israel, for their sins and the sins of the people. He has to kill animals just so he can purify himself, so he can walk in and kill another animal to make a burnt offering for the sins of the people. And what's so amazing about that is they do this every year because they know for a fact that there's not a permanent atonement that they can receive from bulls and goats. Just like Hebrews chapter 10, chapter 12 tells us. Ultimately, we need a perfect sacrifice so that we can be perfectly purified, made white, and refined. This is why I think verse 10 is speaking of us as believers, saints. The wicked shall do wickedly, none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise, those that are the saints of God, they shall understand. There'll be a time when the wicked will choose to do even more wicked things to outdo the wickedness of others before them. We see some of that today. But most specifically, looking at us, we've been made white, we've been refined, and we are charged not just to look at Daniel and say, you know what, I'm not going to study it, I'm not going to invest my time in it. Oh no, I'm going to search, I'm going to trust, I'm going to pray and ask the Lord that he would speak and give us understanding and revelation. So, verse 11, and for the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits, verse 12, and comes to the 1,335 days. Right? So that's speaking again of what was declared to us previously in Daniel. Let me get to it. In Daniel chapter 9, when Gabriel speaks about the 70 weeks, he's speaking about those times and half of times, where we did that math and ultimately understood that from the abomination of desolation, we see that triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem to take away the sins of the world. Well, also, we look forward to those days, those 1,290 days, which is a future event where it is those 3.5 years of the tribulation where the Lord will come again in his second coming and establish his kingdom forever and ever. That wonderful Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So let's just kind of relay that out to us real quickly. Verse 11, from that time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. So, this is what we have to understand from the text that's been given to us and ultimately come to a conclusion. So we have 1,290 days, which is 3.5 years plus 30 days, right? We have the 1,260 days, those 42 months, plus 30 days. Then we have that false image remains in Jerusalem for 30 days after Jesus returns. Why allow this false image to remain 30 days after Jesus returns? No one really knows. What does he mean by these 30 days after the tribulation? We don't know. We really just don't know at this point. Then he says, blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. Well, that's 1,290 plus 45 days, right? That equals 1,335. That's going to be another event. So that's in addition another 45 days, meaning 75 days after the 3.5 years of the tribulation. Something is going to happen after the Antichrist rule is destroyed. Verse 13, but you go your way till the end, for you shall rest, and you will arise to your inheritance at the end of these days. There's this promise to Daniel, and there's this promise to us, that there's going to be a day when we will see the rise of our reward, the rise of our inheritance, telling our rest, as it's shown to us in Daniel chapter 12, verse 13. See, many of these things we still do not fully comprehend. Even with all the technology that we have, of all the understanding of physics and astronomy and the movement of our earth around the sun and understanding of days and hours, minutes, seconds, we're still contemplating a book that was written for us almost 3,000 years ago, 2,600 years ago. And so it's interesting for us to ponder these things, but at the same time not be concerned when we haven't come to that far conclusion of knowing exactly what every jot and tittle is all about. Because you know what? That brings us to falling into trust with the Lord. Again, G. Campbell Morgan has this wonderful thing of saying, when I come to a place in Scripture that I do not understand what the meaning is, what that does for me is makes me fall on my knees and worship the Lord. If the Lord was completely and utterly easy to find out, then he would not be inexhaustible, he would not be sovereign. Our finite minds would be able to incapacitate or fathom, comprehend really the inexhaustibility of our sovereign God. And so this conclusion is wonderful because chapter 12 is really the comfort, the pure voice of Jesus himself speaking to Daniel and his old age, saying, Daniel, you know what? All of these visions that I've given to you, you are to write these things down. You are to seal them up until the time has been given to you for knowledge to increase. But ultimately, Daniel, you have to realize, wouldn't Daniel, out of all the other people that we know from Old Testament Scripture, wouldn't he have a special relationship to the sovereignty of God? Seeing nations, seeing empires collapsing and then brought up, and knowing from these interpretations of these dreams, you know what? I've seen these things happen before they've happened. And now that they've happened, I can trust the Lord and know that he is truly sovereign in the midst of an evil land. So that's the coming to this conclusion where there's a lot of things that we still don't fully understand. We can speculate about them. We can provide our own opinion. But ultimately what's happening is we need to trust the Lord that he is still in control. We need to trust the Lord that when tragedies like Paris just happened over this past weekend, we can still say, you know what? That doesn't mean the Lord is off the throne. The Lord is still in control. And even though evil occurs in this world, there'll be one day where evil never happens ever again. And we need to look forward to those days. Just as the Lord tells him to blessed are those who come to those end, to the 1,335 days. So I know we just sped through that like crazy. Any questions on Daniel chapter 12? Do you guys feel like, at least in a broad sense, that you have a scope of Daniel you could actually share with people? I now know what Daniel is all about in pointing to us, at least in application as believers, that we need to trust a sovereign God, but also these visions that are being shown, we can explain them. That's ultimately what your final is going to be all about. You relating back to me what you've learned in Daniel through your notes and through the scriptures. So, as far as that family tree is concerned, I will get that to you guys, of course, before the week is due. So you guys, well, actually it's 2 weeks now, isn't it? So you guys have a good amount of time for you guys to study and get that set up.